You are Locked On Hawks POSTCAST, part of Locked On Atlanta on the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
Welcome into our Locked On Hawks POSTCAST, your home for the best Atlanta Hawks talk. It's local insight you can't get anywhere but here at Locked On. I'm your host, Tanitra Batiste. Alongside me is Deshaun Tate. Today's episode is brought to you by Monopoly Go. I admit it, I have a competitive side, and it's a big fan of Monopoly Go, the mobile hit twist on the classic Monopoly. So join your friends and download Monopoly Go, now free on the App Store, in the App Store, or Google Play. The Locked On Hawks POSTCAST is also part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Now, the Hawks wrapped the regular season, unfortunately, with a thud. We'll talk about where the team took a wrong turn in the and one, and we'll talk about if the Hawks can provide a repeat performance in who got next. But first, we'll give you our takes on the 157-115 loss to the Pacers. Tate, you said Hawks defended how you thought they would.
Yeah, exactly. And that's exactly what they did, or lack thereof, in terms of defending. I mean, listen, the reality is this. It should be, for the most part, kept pretty short and sweet. This is a better team than the Atlanta Hawks, and that's just the reality of it. And I don't even think it's just – I definitely think it's a better team, but they play much better basketball. The chemistry that they have established amongst one another, they play harder. The energy is infectious. They just have a very organic way of just working well together. This is, and I even did a little bit of research, Tanitra. So in the 4 meetings that they have played Indiana this year, Indiana has put up 590 points. The least amount of points that they put up on the Hawks this year in the 4 meetings has been 126. That is 147 points on average that they have beaten, that they have scored, correct, against the Hawks.
Yeah,
that tells you everything you need to know, specifically in terms of on the defensive side. This is probably a game that maybe the Atlanta Hawks probably, at least I feel like, probably would have lost. Even if the Hawks were completely healthy. I don't think it helped a whole lot that the Hawks weren't and that Indiana was. But it also makes my, identity about this team, being fighters, look very false. If I'm just being honest with you, optically, it just kind of it's looked bad. But this has been an Indiana team that has been good for the most part, pretty much all year long. They were one of the hottest teams on the first half of the year, specifically. With the play-in, in-season tournament and things like that. And they just lost to a well-oiled machine that also had some emotional ties to playoff as well. They win this game, they're 5th or 6th in the playoff seeding, and avoid, having to play potentially as a 7th seed for play-in.
Yeah, and they're 6th. So they'll take on Milwaukee, which dropped to the 3 spot. So that'll be an intriguing matchup for them come playoff time. But while I hear that I hear you, and there is some merit to the emotional piece that you just mentioned, because at the end of the day, they had something to play for. But that wouldn't then explain the 4 games that the Hawks lost. The 3 games where it did matter still, whether or not they lost or won the game. So I think that's where I kind of say, but you got to put a little asterisk on that thought, because when they did play games that quote unquote mattered, the Hawks still lost.
Yep.
And
bad.
One of those games, and that's what I was going to say, one of those games was one in which they got shellacked for 32. So that's why it's a little bit troubling for me, because I get that the Pacers are a high-scoring team, so you better score in every single game. But the only game where the Hawks kind of kept up with them bucket for bucket was back in November, when it was 157-152. In the second game, Hawks only scored 116. That's when they got beat by, actually, I gave them 2 more points than they should have gotten. 34 is what they got beaten by.
Yeah.
Third game, they got beaten by 18. Okay, I guess that's a little bit closer. And then, of course, we know today it was 42 points. So in that instance, it makes me think that, like you said, it kind of refutes the thought of them being fighters, because if it's me, and this kind of goes to the take that I have, you on the bench mob, you should be fighting because you're auditioning. Every game is an audition opportunity for you. And I gave you your flowers on Friday.
Mm-hmm.
I said that you were the player of the game as a whole.
Mm-hmm.
Bench mob, you're not the player today.
Yeah.
Not at all. And I'm going to take Mouhamed Gueye out of that because we're going to talk about him in the and one and what he did specifically. But if you pull away his contribution today, then if you look at the rest of the others, as Shaquille O'Neal famously called them, and it's 16 points, 9 rebounds, 7 assists, 2 steals, and 2 blocks. But that's amongst 5 players. That shouldn't be the case. Yeah. That should not be the case that we're talking about 5 players that collectively, the high score from those 5 players outside of Mouhamed Gueye was 8 points. And that was on an abysmal shooting day, 4-14 from the field, 0 for 5 from 3 for AJ Griffin.
Yeah.
And then Vit Krejci, okay, he had 5 rebounds. It's not bad. 5 assists, not bad. But again, if not for Mouhamed Gueye, the numbers look like what I just called them. So I think that's where I take a little bit of, I have to say the emotion would not, I can't give them full credit for that because you should be emotionally attached to every game that you know for sure is your audition that may determine whether this is your last game in the regular season as a Hawk.
I respect that.
Yeah.
I respect that. And listen, if it wasn't for Mouhamed Gueye, and I know this is just going to sound bad just because we know he put up 19, but this has been so bad, we might be realistically talking about a 61-point butt whooping if it wasn't for Mouhamed Gueye. Like, and just that within itself just kind of sounds crazy. Obviously they didn't get out to a really, good start. I think they went down 8-0. 8-0 rather, to start the game. And then it just seemed like certain guys were having their way. TJ McConnell, who I think is one of the better, if not the best backup, point guard in that role and just game manager. A lot of people make it seem like game manager is such a bad thing. But listen, if you're that backup point guard like TJ McConnell, game manager, some people don't even have a game manager and need a game manager. So I think that there, is something to say about that as well. And, I'm curious to know from some people, and obviously we can get into the comments here, in the next segment or whenever. But I'd be curious to know what kind of effect, even though we know that this isn't Chicago, and even though when they play Chicago on Wednesday, that won't be Indiana, how much confidence or lack thereof did seeing this being showcased on today? What did this tell you? How did this make you feel? Were you feeling better about Chicago before today? Because I think naturally and organically, that's just the way you kind of felt. It's like, yeah, we lost 5 games in a row leading up to today. But for some reason, I'm still willing to give myself a dying chance again, a fighting chance against Chicago. And while you probably still are, this has got to take a little bit of a bite of that confidence away a little bit.
Maybe so. I kind of didn't see it that way. Okay. In my opinion, it was already going to be a tough road to hoe. I get that they won.
For sure.
They beat Chicago once, but I guess I was just looking at the tea leaves of the last 5 games and just already really concerned about any possibility of going back into Chicago and taking a game. But real quick, before we wrap, just a little nod, a tip of the cap to Trae Young, who broke Doc Rivers' assist record. He finished the game with 12 and became the all-time franchise assists leader with 3,867 and did it in much faster, much quicker, much less time than Doc Rivers. Nothing against Glenn Rivers, but this Trae, when it's the dimes, he's just different.
No doubt. Congrats
when we come back,
Trae on that.
Indy, congrats to Trae. When we come back, we already talked about the others that weren't the players of the game, but we'll talk about one who really had a good game in the and one. This episode of our Locked On Hawks Postcast is brought to you by Game Time and Monopoly Go. So Game Time is now an authorized ticket marketplace of Major League Baseball, which makes getting tickets even faster and easier. Prices on the Game Time app actually go down the closer it gets to first pitch. with killer last-minute deals, all-in prices, views from your seat, and their lowest price guarantee. Game Time takes the guesswork out of buying MLB tickets. So you can pick any specific games or matchups that you'd love to attend, talk about any good deals you see for these games, and you can actually have a really good experience with Game Time because they give you little tips and tools like customize your spot. And they also give you opportunities to take advantage of the best deals, saving up to 60% off buying last minute tickets, not just for sports, but also for concerts, comedy, theater, etc. And the lowest price guarantee is one that Game Time gives you, where they will credit 110% of the difference if you're able to get a better deal from another app. So take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNBA for $20 off your first purchase. Terms do apply, but again, create an account and redeem code LOCKEDONNBA for $20 off. Download the Game Time app today. Last minute tickets, lowest price guaranteed. This episode of our Locked On Hawks postcast is also brought to you by Monopoly Go. Hotels should choose which Part 1 segments to air from one week to another. And when I talk about hotels, I don't know if it's me or if it's you or if it's everybody, but that's kind of like one of the fun parts of hotels. So that's the part I wanted to talk to you guys about today. Keep watching our Locked On Hawks postcast and I'll tell you more down the road. Now, like I said before, I am a competitive person. Deshaun is a competitive person, and you might actually have a competitive side as well. If you do, then Monopoly Go is for you. It's been downloaded over 150 million times. So if you haven't heard about it, not sure what rock you've been under, but it is a great twist on the classic Monopoly game where you play on not one, but hundreds of Monopoly boards in crazy locations, building up amazing cities that bring you big money. But the best part is you have an opportunity to kind of have some fun with friends. You can charge them rent on iconic properties, just like the classic Monopoly, but you can also rob their vaults of riches for yourself. And the leaderboards will show you just how big a tycoon you are, which is something that I love. So get in the game and join your friends. Download Monopoly Go now for free in the App Store or on Google Play. Again, that's Monopoly Go. You can download it now for free on the App Store or Google Play. So, Deshaun, we talked about the others who didn't quite bring it today, but there is one guy who did. We'll talk about Mouhamed Gueye in a minute. But first, I want to just take a step back to the second quarter. We're talking about a situation where the Hawks actually found themselves tied in this game, 64 all. Then the Pacers went on a 32-10 run. And I think while the Pacers were running the rest of the game, the Hawks were kind of crawling. But what happened in that second quarter that turned this game that much?
Well, I think what worked out well for the Hawks in the second quarter was just really getting
at the beginning.
Was getting DeJounte going.
Yeah.
I think that's something that really kind of helped them out a whole lot. And I think that was the one thing that he and, Mouhamed Gueye kind of had in common. Was that they kind of played fearless to me. It kind of gave me that, listen, if don't nobody else want to play, I guess then I'm just going to have to take the shot, or I'm just going to have to be the guy to just do it. Then I'll do it if that's what y'all want me to do, kind of thing. And because it just seemed like other guys were kind of somewhat timid, or not even timid, but just waiting to see who was going to be the guy that was going to, be the one to step up and be the leader. Yeah. And the guy who we anticipated stepping up and being the leader was, ironically and coincidentally enough, on top of that, Tanitra, I remember at one point in the second quarter where we saw Mouhamed Gueye step up, and he was like the leading scorer on the team at that point. And it was like second quarter. I mean, it was pretty early, but yet still, I was like, okay, he was the only one in double figures at that time. Right. So ultimately what I think turned the page is that Indiana made adjustments and they just didn't stop. Like, I think, Atlanta was just outmanned by a quantity of people and just quality of talent, and just really didn't have the horses that Indiana had. Some of their shots were going in that just feels like I didn't see Indiana shots go in like this unless they were playing the Hawks. I think we're talking about now 14 times this year Indiana has scored 70 points or more in the first half. The 86 that they had in the first half today was tied for their franchise record.
Mm-hmm.
It was just 12 players scored for Indiana out of 14. Like that's kind of where it stemmed from for me.
Oh yeah. They were having like a monster day. And then it wasn't just 12 players scored. It was Pascal Siakam who scored 28, Miles Turner 31, Nembhard 10, Halliburton, who actually had a modest game, but he only needed to score 12 points. Not a big deal. But then you get down into their bench and everybody but 2 players on their bench scored, and 3 of those guys scored in double digits. And then when you have a chance to kind of look at the play-by-play and you have the opportunity to kind of look at all quarters, or you can just look at a specific quarter. And what it does is it'll actually show you like the makes and the misses. And Deshaun, when you look at the second quarter and they show you like the little blue basketballs and
oh my God.
That tells the story. It's like a bunch of basketballs like right there.
All together. Right. Right.
And they made it like, and they did damage on the inside, which, hey, I get it. Clint Capella wasn't there, but let's not act like, I mean, Miles Turner is good. Don't get me wrong. And obviously he torched him because he had the game high 31 points. So he went off inside. But let's not.
He's not Wilt Chamberlain or anything like that.
Like Bruno Fernando and Mouhamed Gueye couldn't combine to slow this dude down. But that's really where they did their damage. They did their damage inside, and a lot of their damage was done by Miles Turner, both with Miles being able to score the 31 points. And really, you don't see that very often where a center is taking advantage like that. But here's the thing too. I looked at the defensive rebounds. Of his 12 rebounds, 9 of them were on defense. So I think that's the other piece. They were limiting second chance opportunities. He was limiting second chance opportunities for the Hawks. So they really didn't give the Hawks any window to be able to make mistakes. The other piece there, though, we'll give credit where credit is due. And you kind of started that conversation. As we said earlier, the bench mob was a big part of the Hawks being able to get themselves back into the game Friday night. Not so much today, except Mo Gueye. And we've now had a great opportunity, a couple games, to see what he was able to do today. It was a really nice stat line. 19 points, 9 rebounds, 2 steals, 3 blocks, just 27 minutes. How impressed with his play were you, not just today, but these last couple of games?
I mean, this is the guy, and I think I've said it multiple times. This is the guy I've been looking forward to seeing more than probably anybody this season. Maybe the most surprising one so far to me has been, in terms of improvement. And I know that we always talk about Bogey for improving and all this stuff, but had been Bruno Fernando. Just the respect that has grown on me for him has significantly taken some leaps. But outside of that, I think is when you're talking about Mo Gueye in a very small sample size, he hasn't been playing. He's not far removed from, forget about just G League talk, but from just not playing on any floor.
Indeed.
Right. So I think this is only his 6th game playing or something like that. But I was saying enough to say that, that was even more of something I was looking forward to more than I was seeing how Trae and DeJounte could look for the first time in a whole season together, or just whatever the narrative was that was built around that. I've been looking forward to Gueye because I remember what he did at Wazoo. I'm glad to see. I didn't anticipate today happening the way today happened.
Right.
But he also had a very tough assignment on today, not only with the bigs, but also with Pascal Siakam, who I think does measure up with one another pretty good from, just from a body frame standpoint.
Right. And, speaking of another member of that bench mob who has shown some really good flashes in these last couple of games has been Vit Krejci. Now, the Hawks had to make a decision by game time today on whether to sign him to a standard contract or keep him on the 2-way deal. According to Lauren Williams of the AJC, the Hawks opted not to sign Vit to that standard contract. That, of course, makes him ineligible to play in the play-in game. Now, granted, they still have the opportunity to match an offer next year if anyone should give him a standard contract. But was that the right call to say, hey, there's no other player that we want to waive to give you that roster spot.
Yeah, probably. I mean, number one, I'll always preface things by saying I'm not sure if I'm the perfect person to probably ask about this, but I think so. When you start looking at, we already talked about guys that stepped up. I mean, I've been extremely critical about the lack of talent and depth on this bench, and what they've shown me during, this probably last few, not even weeks, but it's been a little bit more consistent in that. Like, I feel like it's been about a month or month and a half, like even since or right before Trae went down, they were playing pretty well. Vit Krejci, Garrison Matthews, Bruno Fernando, Kobe Buffkin, another one. DeAndre Hunter, when he got sent to the bench, started looking a lot different than he did in the starting lineup. So I do think that with him playing the big part that he has and really putting together some unique moves, showing what he has right now, maybe by default, the Hawks need just about all that they can get. So as long as they can put him in, check him into the game, it's going to be a plus no matter what the decision was that they made.
True indeed. Now, the Hawks are on the road and they'll be staying on the road. They'll be right there in the Midwest. They'll probably potentially come home. It depends. But regardless, if they stay in the Midwest or if they don't, they're going to be returning to the Midwest come Wednesday because they have a playing game with a team that's really given them some fits this year. We're going to talk about keys to the game and who got next. This episode of our Locked On Hawks postcast is also brought to you by PrizePicks. PrizePicks is America's #1 fantasy sports app with more than 3 million members. It's the easiest and most exciting way to get in on the action while you watch your favorite sports and players. You just pick more or less on 2 or more player stats and watch the winnings roll in. Now, March is over, granted, and that's a sad thing for Deshaun because that means March Madness is over, but the biggest moments in college basketball tipped off in the month of April. And so you were able to take advantage of the action with PrizePicks for men's and women's college basketball, but you still have some opportunities to take advantage of basketball because, of course, the NBA postseason is about to be underway. Hockey's postseason is about to be underway. And, of course, there is always the opportunity for other sports like we talked about basketball, NBA. We talked about hockey rather, and Major League Baseball is underway. So how do you get in on the fun? Well, they make it simple. Download the app, use code LOCKEDONNBA for a first deposit match up to $100. Again, that's downloading the app today, PrizePicks. You use the code LOCKEDONNBA for that first deposit match up to $100. And it's really easy to do. And remember, pick more or pick less because it's that easy. So, Deshaun, the time has now come for the play-in round. We have a little bit better of a picture of the playoffs and how everybody kind of fell for 1 through 10. But we'll just kind of focus on the Eastern Conference because actually for the Western Conference, a lot is still left to play because a lot of those teams are actually playing games as we speak. But today we found out, we knew what the number 1 was going to be, right? Going into the postseason, Boston had locked that up quite a bit ago, right? But there were other games that were predicated, that seeding was predicated on what would happen today. So one of those games was Knicks Bulls, and one of those games was Bucks Magic. So the Magic blew out the Bucks. Probably something you could have expected without Giannis Antetokounmpo. And the Magic really needed to win that as well because they've been swooning the last couple of games. And the Knicks actually got by the Bulls in overtime, 120-119. And that Magic score, by the way, was 113-88. So now we know for sure exactly who's going to play where in the Eastern Conference. And like we said, Boston had sealed the deal on that number 1 spot. It was really just a matter of who was going to be 2 and 3. And it would have been the New York Knicks now that they've gotten that win over the Bulls. The Milwaukee Bucks are in the 3rd seed. Cleveland Cavaliers were pretty much sealed up in that 4th spot. But Orlando was trying to make sure that they did not get into the play-in round or land in the 6th spot. They get in the 5th spot. And the Pacers as well, with the win over the Hawks, were able to escape the play-in. So now we're talking about the Sixers at 7, Heat at 8, Bulls at 9, Hawks at 10. The Bulls have, for the most part, had the Hawks number, right? 2 out of 3 games they were able to win, and they were in it for the most part until the Hawks pulled away in the 3rd game. So that game, Deshaun, was about 2.5 weeks ago. What do you need to see the Hawks put on repeat in order for the Hawks to walk away with a win and then at least have an opportunity to win one more and get to the playoffs?
First of all, I refuse for Wednesday night to be our last postcast doing together, Tanisha. So I'm going to need this team to get it together because we all need more.
There's always next season.
We always need more Tanisha Batiste in our lives. Never can get enough of that.
Thank
Control Andre Drummond, for crying out loud.
Yes.
He has probably been the piece that has probably, just kind of destroyed, annihilated the Hawks more than any just complete domination, if I'm just being honest. Kind of forced the bench, I feel like if you could control the bench, then you have a much better chance. The starters is only really going to be so effective. They're a team that is likely going to be looking for a new coach next year, Billy Donovan. Make that a real thing. Put the exclamation point on that. Be the reason for why they have a new search. Even more so. I think that, control Vucevic and get on the boards as much as you can. Kobe White obviously had been up for, most improved with Bogey. Bogey outplayed Kobe White as well. And of course, you already know how I think. The free throws, the turnovers, the little things, doing the little things, not about the big things, doing the little things, and force them to try and put some offense up on you, because we know that that's not a department that they really excel at.
Yeah, and I think the same, because it's an interesting matchup, because I could say that the Bulls have had the Hawks number, and it's the truth on some level. They have definitely gotten the best of them in the first 2 games, but the Hawks were almost able to hold them to 100, the score 113-101. That was the final a couple weeks ago. But like you said, it's kind of digging into the numbers and seeing how the Hawks were able to get over the hump. You're right. They had to start with Andre Drummond. Now, did they do a lot of good against him on the boards? No. 18 rebounds, 10 of which were defensive. So you got to make sure that you do a better job of getting second chance points and not allowing him to limit them. And they were actually able to kind of keep him in check as far as scoring. Yes, he was 5 of 8, but he only had 13 points for the game, and he was only 50% from the free throw line. So maybe you need to throw a few bodies at him for starters, send him to the free throw line and make him earn the point. So that's one place, I think. And he would be for us that guy we always talk about. He's not necessarily the random role player, because we do know the name Andre Drummond, but role player he is. Yeah. And so that's a role player that you don't have the choice. Like, I don't even know, Deshaun. Yeah, I don't know if you want to say contain him. You might just have to flat out stop him.
Yeah.
I don't know.
I'm glad you said that.
And another one whom we've been talking about as well, that they did do a good job of containing last go round, who gave them fits in those first couple of games, was Ayo Dosunmu. They were able to hold him to just 15 points in that game, and he torched them, absolutely torched them the first couple games. So I think that's a piece as well. And finally, of course, which is probably the obvious in the room, you can't let DeMar DeRozan score 31 points and think that you're going to be able to move on in the play-in. But hey, you guys, join us on Wednesday. We'll talk about it. It's going to be a late night, so you better stay up for us, because that game has a 9:30 tip. But hey, this is where you should hang out every game. Locked On Sports Atlanta and Locked On Hawks Postcast. Remember to like and subscribe to our YouTube channel. And for more on the Hawks, check out Locked On Hawks with our guy, Brad Rowland. We will see you guys Wednesday night.